Seeds to me are basically very fascinating things. Amazing that, life can come out of something that's like a speck on the end of your finger and produce tomatoes. My parents and grandparents and all my relatives gardened. I lived in the Boise Valley area, and I started growing my own garden when I was about 3. The first things that I tried was the yellow pear tomato, and I remember tasting those and thinking, wow, how great they tasted. When I was about 17, I was a member of Seed Savers Exchange and had been collecting and trading seeds for several years. And so I decided, why not go ahead and put out our own little price list? It was worth a try. I put out 550 catalogs the first year. When 1999 came, because of Y2K, a lot of people were getting back into gardening. Plus, a lot of food magazines had came out with articles on growing different seeds. We went from printing 550 catalogs in 1998 to about 7,500 in 1999. This year, it's up to 250,000 copies. It was a hobby. It still is. It's a hobby. It's a passion. It's something I really love. You can get thousands of different combinations of color and shape and size. It's unlimited. Plus, just the history. I love knowing that, this very seed is something that's descended from Thomas Jefferson, or the Romans grew this. For several years, we'd been talking about opening something somewhere else. Drove all through Southern and Central California looking for a spot, and when we got to Petaluma, we liked the area, liked the people here, liked the local food movement. Everybody was very supportive of the idea. We currently have around 1,400 different varieties of seeds, so it's a fairly good amount, but which is really tiny on the scale of what's out there available and also on what's been lost in this country in the last 100 years. So we have one called Spear's Tennessee Green. A family brought this in. They were given it like 30 or 40 years ago. It's a green tomato. It's really a wonderful tasting tomato. It's pretty much, just one garden away from being lost. We try to grow it at our place and usually try to get a couple growers growing it as well. But when you only have a dozen seeds, pretty much you only got one chance. That's a question that's kind of open to debate. Some people say it's something that's been passed down for 50 years. Other people say longer. An heirloom seed basically is one that's an open pollinated or non-hybrid, which basically means it will grow and pollinate just like they do in nature. Just minute changes might happen over generations. A hybrid is one that's a cross between two different varieties. One might be a little wild cherry tomato that ain't really useful, but it might have disease resistance. And they might cross it with another variety that has delicious fruit. The problem comes in hybrids is if a home gardener tries to save that variety, in most cases it reverts back to its wild parent. You never know what you're going to get if you save seed from that variety. The nice thing with heirlooms, you can find something that was developed in San Francisco or something that was developed in Missouri versus hybrids, which are mostly developed just in the ideal climates for those varieties. Most, winter carrots might be out of Florida. If you try to take a commercial variety and try to grow it in Kentucky, it might not do so well. Whereas there's heirlooms in Kentucky that you can get from your neighbor, they'll do great. Oh, the history goes back a long ways. When Columbus got here, the Native Americans were already growing things like the patty pan squash, runner beans, corn, of course. As people started immigrating here, more and more varieties have been grown. America is a combination of genetic material as far as seeds go. Starting in the 1930s and 40s, people started thinking we need to produce more food to feed everybody, put in bigger farms, use more chemicals, and by the 1950s, everybody was pretty much growing, large crops of everything just to make a living, which also, of course, brought the prices down on food. And in turn, people had to look for varieties that would produce well with heavy chemical concentrations. And as more and more people were looking for the new varieties, the old varieties just started disappearing out of catalogs. When you're a commercial grower, your main interest is in shipping. You have to have something that can keep and travel from Guatemala or California to New York. So flavor is, way down on the list. Everything went from basically producing something that you love to produce to just trying to produce as much as you can to beat your neighbor who is also trying to produce as much as he can. We love growing different lettuces, and there's just so many colorful ones to choose from. The flame is a red and green lettuce, and the forellentrus, it means speckled like a trout. This is one of our favorite cantaloupe varieties. It's called the banana melon. These will grow 2 to 3 feet long. A very great flavor. They'll weigh up to about 20 pounds. It's a great old-time classic American melon. This is a cucumber cycum that was described many years ago by explorers in northern India. They're a big tan, kind of a brown, they look like a big russet potato. But the unique thing about this cucumber is it can store for up to 2 months after it's harvested, and it'll still be crisp and sweet inside. This is a unique eggplant. It's called Turkish orange. This variety produces bright orange fruit, unlike anything you've ever seen at a grocery store. They look like miniature pumpkins hanging off the tall green plants. And this is the golden beet, which is fairly common now in farmers markets, but for many years had disappeared. Delicious, really sweet roots, and they don't bleed like regular beets and make everything red. So here's a couple varieties of Chinese long beans or noodle beans. The red noodle and the Chinese mosaic. This is among our favorite crop to grow. It's just so colorful, and it's great in stir fries and soups and all different ways, but a really fun crop. Oh, all different ways. Sometimes people will just bring us in a handful of seeds and say, I collected these in Jamaica and you want to try them. Other times we've traveled like to Central America or Thailand. Usually we find most of our stuff just wandering around, you know, taking back roads and looking in the fields and looking for people that have interesting stuff along the roads. When we get to Thailand and you walk in and there's like 15 kinds of eggplant in one market. Green eggplants and purple eggplants that are the size of a green pea, and giant eggplants that are 3 and 4 pounds. You never know what you're going to find. It's just kind of, you show up and you look for things. One watermelon we got a few years ago, I remember trying. I was just like, wow, this is the best watermelon I've ever tasted. It's called Ali Baba. It's actually an Iraqi variety. A person sent it to us a few years before the Iraqi war. With our presence over there over the last few years, a lot of farmers have quit gardening, and we've also brought in a lot of the commercial and genetically engineered varieties. We work with pretty much any nonprofit that asks for a seed donation to help with either hunger or educational projects. We would love to get varieties back into their old countries if we can. Probably have a time or two. Yeah, a pocket or a shoe or a wallet, you know, tomato seeds, they'd put a few under a postage stamp. You can mail seeds into the country. I mean, it is technically illegal, but people do it. The laws, though, change at such an amazing rate. You never know whether it's illegal or not, depending on the country. Mexico, we brought back a bunch of seeds one time, and they pulled us over and wanted to look through the car. So they looked through the car and found all kinds of seeds in there. Basically, everything was okay except the amaranth seed. He was afraid it might be a species of amaranth that's a weed in Mexico. But he spilled about half the bag in the car getting out, so we ended up having the amaranth, and anyway. And it wasn't a weed, it was just the commercial domestic amaranth. So I really don't believe in, you know, the extensive patents on seed in general. For thousands of years, seeds were traded and sold and basically free for all. And we have a very dim look as far as how we feel about genetically engineered seeds and the way they're being used to control farmers. In order to plant these seeds, they have to sign an agreement that says that employees can come on their place for 5 years after they've quit growing these seeds. At any moment, you can have an inspector checking your farm. As far as seed collectors go, I mean, about 50% of our corn varieties over the last 10 years have been contaminated with genetically engineered varieties. We're one of the few companies that actually test to see if the corn is contaminated or not. And even growers in remote areas have been getting contaminated. There's been multiple lawsuits against farmers that never planted gene-altered varieties just because their neighbor planted them and the pollen got into their fields. Basically, you're a thief whether you do it intentionally or it blows in from your neighbor's field. Why do we want to put our entire food supply basically in the hands of a few companies? One company could quit producing seeds, and that would be, you know, a third of our seed supply. As far as the big commercial crops that people are trying to promote, and the companies that promote genetic engineering are saying going to feed the population, so far the major problem they have yet to prove is that they will. They promoted the yellow rice a few years ago that was supposed to have more nutrients and produce better and have more protein. So far they've had yet to prove that it's going to yield better in field conditions. Most of these things have been tested and showed only in laboratories. The other issue is they don't release these crops in general unless they have a farmer that's willing to pay, you know, an exorbitant amount. In many cases, 8 to 10 times more than traditional seeds. Like in India, some of the varieties that they said were going to be so resistant have not proven as resistant as they said they're going to be. And the insects came back, and now the farmers can't afford the high cost of pesticides that they said they wouldn't need anymore, but they're needing again, so the farmers are going out of business in large numbers. As far as saving seeds, it varies on the type of crop, but usually it's pretty simple. Like on tomatoes, you pretty much just cut a tomato open, scoop out the pulp, and put it in a cup for a few days, let it ferment. A few days later, the seeds sink to the bottom and the pulp floats off, and that's true for a lot of pulpy fruit. Other crops like corn just dries right on the stalks. Bean seeds are really simple. They don't cross-pollinate easily. If you just buy regular garden beans, just let the pods dry, you harvest the pods and pull out the seeds. It's very simple, and it's one way to guarantee that you're going to have food.